Thomas here with Much Props, going to give you another how-to video. Today I am once again carrying on the spooky theme for this Halloween season. It is getting closer and closer upon us, and I thought it would be fun to do something relatively simple. Now, I'm going to kind of go a little bit extra on the finishing, but I wanted to approach a question that I get asked often, which is, you see me build something on the channel, which typically it's my first go making that item, and I don't have a lot of testing out other materials when I'm going to build something. After 550 videos, I get pretty comfortable with guessing what will work and going with it. But I get a lot of people asking the question, can I make this prop with something else? Cardboard versus foam versus clay versus warblub versus a number of other different materials that you could possibly be using. Definitely my way is not the only way, and it's just a showcase of how I approached the task of making that object. So I thought I could make something easy and make some gravestones, tombstones, headstones, whatever you want to call them, stones. But I'm only going to make them a couple of inches tall, and I'm going to make them out of foam, out of clay, and out of cardboard. All three relatively easy to get your hands upon, so without further ado, let's make some headstones for some monsters. Let's get to building. I'm going to make this same prop 3 times using different materials so you can see some basic things to keep in mind when choosing what products to use. I'll try and list some pros and cons as well as give my general rationale for when I use specific materials and why. I drew a simple pattern of a gravestone and base to sit on. I'll include this pattern in the description below if you need it, although it's a pretty simple shape. I'm going to start with cardboard. We just had pizza the night before, and I thought it would be nice to recycle this box. There's never a shortage of cardboard in my house, and with all the stuff we order online, it's nice to kind of reuse those things that could just end up in a landfill. In terms of cost, they're free. It's lightweight. However, there is a limit to the size, thickness, quality, and moldability. Trace out the pattern several times and cut it out with a hobby knife. For the assembly of this cardboard version, I'm going to use hot glue. It cools down quickly and gets a good grip on the paper layers. Hot glue also does a great job of covering that corrugation on the sides. I'm using some low temp hot glue so it sets up really fast. For larger areas, I would recommend getting one of the hotter setting ones so that you can have a longer work time. Since this object is flat, cardboard is a good choice. If there were curves, I would probably not choose cardboard. When I first started teaching, I did a lot of projects using cardboard because I didn't have a lot of money fresh out of college and this was readily accessible. Its limitations do force you to get a bit more creative and really plan out your build. The covering of the corrugation is as easy as peeling off a layer of the paper from the cardboard and gluing it down onto your area, trimming it to fit. In the front of the grave, I wanted it to mound up a little bit so it looked like dirt that was piled on top, and all I did was tore up a couple of small pieces and stack them on top of each other till I got the heap I wanted. I will echo this aesthetic across the other two. You could also grind up cardboard into pulp and add a little bit of water. This makes kind of a paste that you can smear on to get more organic shapes. I don't have a lot of time to sit and wait for that kind of setup to dry, but it's also a doable thing with this material. I am sealing the paper with a couple of layers of Mod Podge to try and mitigate the lines that you will inevitably still see if you look at the end result. You could take it a step further and sprinkle on sand, dirt, art medium filler, gap filler, Bondo, TP, or a number of other paste/techniques to make them disappear. If you just applied paint, the paper would absorb it and the lines would be more noticeable. It is a drawback to cardboard that is often a reason why I don't like using it for all applications. Don't get me wrong, I've made some pretty awesome things with cardboard and have seen much more talented people than me make some god tier level stuff out of cardboard. But for me, the amount of time finishing and the limitations of making complex shapes always leaves me looking for a different material. Now on to the EVA foam. I know I use it a lot, but it really is one of those materials that I feel like I am most comfortable with. It can be used just like the cardboard in terms of stacking on layers. It comes in a wide variety of thicknesses, colors, and textures. There are different densities that allow you for more flexibility or rigidity if you need it. It can be heat formed, sanded, texturized, and extremely lightweight. There is a closet in my build room that I keep stuffed with all different kinds of EVA. Obviously, it's going to be a little more expensive than the free cardboard, but for the versatility and convenience, I feel like it's well worth the $15 to $20 a roll. I traced the pattern onto my 10mm foam and cut it out with a sharp hobby knife. You will notice that this material is all in one clip. When you're making a video a week, a big factor that one has to consider is, will using this material save me time? If I was 3D printing this object, it would probably take me somewhere around 5 to 7 hours to print. It's a very common comment that I get when I build something, you should have 3D printed that. I built it in foam in less than 20 minutes and only spent about an hour painting it, so I'm an hour and 20 in versus 7 hours to print, another hour or two to clean up, then prime, then paint, so I'm saving time. If you're sanding EVA, you want to wear a respirator and work in a well-ventilated area so you don't breathe in the particles. Here in the US, I have tons of access to this material, but I understand that that's not the case everywhere. It also takes up extra space and may not be the most pleasant of smells, especially when it is new or being burnt. I'm gonna glue this foam up with some contact cement. You could also use hot glue or CA glue if you wanted to. To speed up the setup time, I hit it quickly with a heat gun. Once the glue is no longer wet to the touch, you can stick the parts together. I feel like this has a much better bond than the hot glue, especially compared to that on cardboard. Once fully set, I'm more likely to rip the foam before I pull apart the glue line. So for costume pieces, EVA is a very nice option. EVA does have a bit of a learning curve to use, and the quality of the foam can be a hit or miss depending on the source. To seal my foam, I like to use 2 coats of Plasti Dip. My last material I'm going to use for this build is polymer clay. In particular, I am using Sculpey, which once formed can be baked to make this prop rock hard. To fill up some of the space so that I don't have to make the entire thing out of this product and make it super heavy, I'm going to compact a bit of foil to make the base shape. Then I'm going to roll out a sheet of kneaded clay to wrap around the puck. I am by no means a master with clay, but I will say that I always have fun with it. It brings back that nostalgia of playing with Play-Doh as a kid for me. The build always seems to go quicker, and I can get a lot more cool textures with a lot less effort. There is also drawbacks like dropping your material or a heavy hand leaving indents. You can bake it as many times as you want, and with special glues you can get parts to stick or not stick to each other if you want. When working with clay, you can definitely go overboard with all the various shaping tools that are available. This is my collection of several Amazon purchases, and really I end up only using 2 or 3 tools, with a majority of the shaping being done with my fingers. I put it on a baking sheet so that you could see it a little bit easier. On my light table mat, it just kind of washes out with the studio lights. There are a couple of big drawbacks to clay. While yes, it is easy to work with, it's much more heavier than the other 2 gravestones, and it also makes it very fragile. At a 4-foot drop, the other 2 materials would take little to no damage at all. This sculpt would shatter into a bunch of pieces. Once shaped, I put it onto parchment paper and cook it in the oven for 15 to 30 minutes at 275 degrees Fahrenheit or 130 degrees Celsius. To seal my clay and act as a base color for all the rest of the gravestones, I coat a layer of black spray paint. Now, I thought about painting these 3 different ways, but I wanted you to see the comparison of similar techniques on varying materials. To finish them all off, I'm going to make a first pass with a dry brush of some dark gray acrylic paint across the surface. Then every layer on top of that, I add a little bit of white to build up the color variation. To make them look aged, I added some watered down acrylics to the top in browns and greens and let it drip down the sides. You can definitely see the lines in the cardboard, the lack of small details in my quick EVA carve, and a few fingerprints that I didn't smooth out in my clay. All parts have flaws. I wrote out what I wanted to put on each headstone. I went with OGs for Drac and Frank's monster, and then went a bit obscure with the date reference for the werewolf. See if you can figure that one out. I put some cheesy puns on the gravestone using Sharpie because I didn't have a small tipped paint pen or the patience to hand paint on tiny little letters. This means the smaller text will be harder to read, but for the aesthetic that I'm going for, kind of fits an aged headstone. They are pretty much done at this point, but I wanted to have an excuse to do a little bit of portrait work, so I used the 3 small flat surfaces on the back as canvases. Each tombstone will get the monster labeled on the front. For Frankenstein's monster, I started with the light greens and went up and down in values, adding some browns, whites, and blacks to match closer to my classic monster reference image as I could. These are a bit smaller characters than I'm used to painting, so I definitely saw it as a challenge to place bits in just the right spot. I also didn't sketch anything before I started, so it added to the level of difficulty. For Dracula, I went with the inspiration from Bram Stoker's character that he used, the 15th century warlord Vlad the Impaler. I took the historical painting known as Portrait of Vlad III Dracula, embossed portrait, done by an unknown artist in the 16th century. It was a similar progression as Frankenstein's monster with lighter colors down first. I will admit, in the early stages of it, it looked like Bob from Bob's Burgers, but I trusted the process and kept layering on paint. If you have never read the history behind the story the monster is based on, Vlad III, aka Dracula, was an absolute ruthless ruler of Wallachia 3 separate times before his death. Most notable of his carnage was impaling over 2,000 men, women, and children and left them to rot outside the city of Targovista to intimidate the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II. I looked at a bunch of images for werewolves and settled on this dark-lit, sharp-toothed puppy in the moonlight. Since his body was cast in shadow with only edges and his facial features in bright colors, I started with darks and worked my way to lights on this one. The color scheme and heavy paint strokes gave me a Starry Starry Night vibe, which I definitely dig. The folklore of werewolves has numerous claims to its origins, some citing the Epic of Gilgamesh being the first, or the more modern take of the ancient Greeks and Romans. Regardless of your path you choose to walk down in mythology, no tale can be more epic than the bench-warming nerd Scott Howard's rage transforming into a werewolf to bring his last place basketball team to first place within the last minutes, defeating the dragon enemies. Yeah, the premise to the 1980s movie Teen Wolf with Michael J. Fox. To cover up some transitions and hide my rough edges of my cardboard, I'm going to give it a little static grass application. I'm sure I'm probably overloading my hopper, or I may have broken the probe, but the static grass wasn't staticking. I sprinkled on the fake grass after laying down some grass adhesive and lost my patience because it wouldn't stand up, eventually abandoning ship and just piling it on by hand, matting it down with my ginormous fingers. I spritzed on a little watered down glue over the top of it and am officially calling this build done. I hope you got some helpful tips from this one and will try your hand at some tombstone miniatures yourself. And we are finished. Here is the end result. Overall, I think they turned out pretty good. I especially liked the ability to do some portraits on the back side of them just to give me an excuse. Why not make it more difficult on myself? I think I like the wolf the best, but yeah, hopefully this will give you some ideas and allow you to better understand why I don't necessarily know the answer to the question, because it is my first attempt on a lot of these. Now, anything that is like flat, I would say go hog wild with any material you can get your hands on. You could have easily done this exact same thing with a number of other materials. You could have gone wood, you could have gone thermoplastics, you could have gone PVC, styrene, Worbla, acrylic, a number of other things, and got pretty similar results from this. Just you may have to use different chemicals or paints or finishes in order to get that same look that you wanted from each. But yeah, maybe you will try and make one of these yourselves and impress your friends with your ability to use different materials to achieve the same goals, and ask the question and have it be answered by yourself. Can I use ... Yeah. Maybe you'll get some. Yay! And inevitably, someone's gonna ask you, how'd you make that? And give them one of these. Tell them, much props. Guess it's time to go put these on a table or a shelf or a D&D board. Peace out. If you enjoy what I do here on YouTube and want to see more builds like this one, please consider joining these awesome people listed here with me over on my Patreon to build a bigger, better, more creative community together.